So if we pick up our discussion about like what to expect and whether or not this is good, right? Big fundamental question is: does this program actually work? So does this relieve and take care of the problems that we seem to see, right? And what are some of the consequences of doing that? So the big chief things is that one, does police misconduct go down? That's a good one. Or does this affect crime at all? Why is this affecting crime? Well, you're retraining a lot of officers. You're telling them to change a lot of policing behaviors that they have. And, there is some fear, right, that because of the intense scrutiny that's involved with a consent decree, right, that this means officers become less engaged with their job and crime might increase. This is actually the justification that the Trump administration used to stop federal consent decree programs, or essentially stop them, because the fear of crime was too high. But we also may be kind of interested not only in police misconduct, not only in crime, but use of force patterns. We also may be interested in citizen opinions. So if they believe in police departments, or if they think that they're good, if they believe that they have more police legitimacy, do they have more faith in these outcomes, and so on, right? So the problem that has been, kind of plagued this for a while, right, is that, this isn't necessarily a hugely widely used program per se. There has to be, a lot of political will to use the program. So, for example, this program was a lot more active underneath the Obama administration than it was underneath the Trump administration. It was a lot more active during the Bush administration than it was under the Clinton administration. And that's, so there's that aspect of it. Two is that there are data comparability issues, because each department counts and records things differently. They have to go by, whatever standards set by the department or the state. And there really isn't one besides of it, right? There's also issues with history and measurement issues, because if you consider that if we want to look at citizen complaints, if you consider the fact that some agencies did not have a complaint system in place, period, and all of a sudden complaints rose, is that a function of the fact that, there are more complaints, or the fact that there's actually a complaint system in place? The other part to consider too is that even if there is a complaint system in place, if you made it easier to form a complaint, so rather than, doing it, if you only came to the station in the police department to register a complaint, did you now make it easier to submit a complaint against an officer, right? So, there are issues to consider if you look at complaints, whether that's an issue, right? It's relatively easy to look at crime. So crime is, easy to look at, right? But, use of force reporting is also problematic, just because, it's hard to, have measurable data, especially since there are different definitions, there are different policies. Do you judge it based off of changes in different policies? Do you judge it off of an objective standard? There are all kinds of different rules that are in place that, affect our interpretation of that. It's also really hard to study, citizen satisfaction before and after, because most of the time, right, the investigation and identification of a police department occurs, with the news report, right? It's hard to have a pre-level of citizen satisfaction because, you can't deploy a survey if you don't know that agency is going to be targeted like a year before, right? So, if you're going to have multiple waves, plus it's very expensive to run a survey in a community, You know, there's, as far as I know, there's only been one study that has looked at, like, used the citizen survey, and they had to do it during the consent decree and after the consent decree was over, right? So it's really, you know, kind of a lot of issues related to that make it hard to track, right? Now, from my perspective, right, so if we have like the citizen satisfaction issue, right, there's also, you know, maybe like how do we go about this, right? You know, crime seems the easiest one. There also could be issues for police injuries and casualties. And if you look at my paper that I wrote on this, right, you could also look at civil lawsuits filed against the agency as well, because they, you know, are at least a proxy for citizen satisfaction and citizen and abuse by police department, right? So in this case, then, you know, ultimately we end up finding more often than not that consent decrees, you know, may be effective, you know, kind of like short term. So definitely during the consent decree is in effect, and maybe, you know, after the years following. But it also creates a problem like, you know, is this actually useful in the long years, right? Because agencies are often motivated to meet the terms of the agreement to get out from under, you know, observation, but, you know, that may lapse afterwards, right? Because they're, you know, they're not committed to the institutional change; they're just committed to meeting the terms of the agreement. You know, so there's a lot of questions related to that. Most cases, most of the time, show that, you know, while the consent decree is in effect and immediately after, you know, there is a decrease in problematic behaviors, but, you know, they may increase a little bit. It's still really unknown because there aren't very many studies in this area, and it's hard to get longitudinal data. So that is something to be a problem. It's a bit of an issue, right? So in this case, then, you know, I think, you know, something to be mindful of is new directions, right? About what new areas could happen related to this, and what questions are left to be unknown, you know, because there's issues related to, are we willing to pay for this kind of change? Are we willing to, you know, expand the program? What restrictions do we want to have in place? Are we going to fund people to do this? How does this affect public opinion? Are there new ways to look at public opinion, right? There's all kinds of new avenues to go through. But I think this issue is going to be critically important because the Biden administration has seemed more willing to engage on these kinds of issues than the Trump administration, so that we may see an expansion of this program that was not seen underneath the Trump administration, which was more of a contraction. But all that remains to be seen, right? It's really kind of an exciting area, and maybe we'll get to know more, and maybe we won't. But you know, for now, you know, we'll go ahead and end this series of videos, and